that Trump is in a better position than he's ever been. If you look at his three presidential campaigns, he was behind by significant margins in polls to Hillary Clinton all the way up to Election Day in 2016. He was behind by something like 10 points to Joe Biden at this stage in 2020. Those were both different years, different campaigns, and the pollsters will tell you that they have fixed the problems that led them to undercount Trump voters in both of those campaigns. But it remains the case that the fact that this race is so close, the fact that it's virtually tied in every single one of the swing states with a slight average for Kamala Harris in the popular vote, means that Trump, it seems to be in quite good position. That doesn't mean that he would win if the election were held today, but they certainly are accustomed to being much more underdogs. And so I think that that gives his campaign a feeling of confidence.
Exactly 3 weeks till America goes to the polls. Some early voting will run underway, or if not, is imminent. The two contenders for the White House remain nip and tuck, both in national polls and in local polls in the crucial swing states. So what could change things in 21 days? Let's speak to two expert watchers, both colleagues at the Wall Street Journal, Gerard Baker, editor-at-large, Molly Ball, the paper's senior political correspondent, biographer of Nancy Pelosi. Molly, let me come to you first. I was intrigued that one of a lot of emphasis now, even in the pro-democratic press, on Kamala Harris's campaign, and stories of how the Harris campaign and the White House are not exactly singing these days from the same song sheet.
Well, there does appear to be a little bit of tension there. I think it's inevitable. Ironically, it comes as Harris has at the same time struggled to separate herself from President Biden, which is something that she's viewed as needing to do in order to establish herself as a candidate who represents change in some way. So she's sort of caught in a no-win situation here where, on the one hand, if she deviates from President Biden, there's potentially some hurt feelings with the man who is still in the White House, is still the current president, although he's become pretty invisible as this campaign goes on. On the other hand, she has, as I said, has struggled to say, and when asked directly, has said she can't think of anything that would make her different from the current president, or that she disagrees with that has been done by the administration she's been a part of so far. And I know from talking to voters that they would like to hear more about how she might do things differently from this administration, which is quite unpopular.
Jerry, I was struck the Axios story. It's a website on Washington politics in the United States. I was struck that the Axios story, which was talking about this sort of rift between the Harris campaign and the White House, there were 10 people in that Axios story quoting from the Harris campaign. The fact that 10 of them had time suggested to me that this really was a campaign in a bit of trouble, or at least an unhappy campaign.
Yeah, it did have a little bit of the sort of blame quality that's quite an ominous one that you see sometimes late in campaigns when things aren't going right. They look for people to blame. We had that, as you say, that story, and Molly's right. There's clearly been tensions. Biden didn't want to go. We've known that all along, and was kind of felt forced out, and is also obviously unhappy that in some respects Kamala Harris has been sort of trying to demonstrate that she's distant from him. So that issue's been around, and so there's a little bit of blame going in that direction. I thought the other interesting thing last week was there was a sort of blame black men approach from Barack Obama. Barack Obama went to Pittsburgh and spoke to a group of black men and basically said, you're not voting for Kamala Harris, some of you, because she's a woman and you don't like the idea of women being in charge because you're basically misogynist. I mean, when you have that kind of when you have those signals coming from a campaign of recrimination, mutual kind of resentment, blame, allocating responsibility, it's not usually a good sign. All that said, the race remains as close.
Sure.
Somebody said it started out as a dead heat and it's only got closer, in the last 6 months. It remains as close as ever. I do think the mood in the Trump people's mood is pretty robustly upbeat. They really do think, once again, the polls are probably understating their support, which means, given that he's in a better position poll-wise than he was either 4 or 8 years ago, won 8 years ago and nearly won 4 years ago, they feel pretty good about it. But as I say, 3 weeks to go. go. It's as tight as it could possibly be.
Well, Molly, why is there that difference, and why should the Trump campaign be upbeat in a sense? Because when I look at the Trump campaign from the outside, it seems to me it's going nowhere. He's got ever more repetitive. The rallies are just boring these days. He's got nothing new to say about it, and yet it seems to be the Harris campaign that's in more trouble. How did that work out?
Some of this may just be a personality difference between the parties. It's sort of a ritual every 4 years that the Democrats enter what we call the sort of bedwetting stage, where everybody becomes very anxious. And I suppose one could do all sorts of psychological speculation about why Democrats are predisposed to this sort of anxiety, where Republicans tend to sort of bluster through with confidence. It's also the case, though, that Trump is in a better position than he's ever been. If you look at his 3 presidential campaigns, he was behind by significant margins in polls to Hillary Clinton all the way up to Election Day in 2016. He was behind by something like 10 points to Joe Biden at this stage in 2020. Those were both different years, different campaigns, and the pollsters will tell you that they have fixed the problems that led them to undercount Trump voters in both of those campaigns. But it remains the case that the fact that this race is so close, the fact that it's virtually tied in every single one of the swing states with a slight average for Kamala Harris in the popular vote, means that Trump, it seems to be in quite good position. That doesn't mean that he would win if the election were held today, but they certainly are accustomed to being much more underdogs. And so I think that gives his campaign a feeling of confidence.
Well, at a Trump rally in Philadelphia last night, he ended up by swaying his way through a long series of music tracks. 2 people fainted. Harris tweeted to say, "I hope he's okay." And just listen to this. Here he is. He's doing a sort of master of ceremonies act.
And those 2 people that went down are patriots, and we love them. Yes. And because of them, we ended up with some good music, right? Right? So play YMCA. Go ahead. Let's go. Nice and loud.
Here we go, everybody.
Well, there was 40 more minutes of music after the YMCA played there. Jerry, what can change in the next 3 weeks, or what could happen in the next 3 weeks that will change the result?
So first of all, let me just say, I think you're being a little bit unfair there. I mean, first of all, there was a medical emergency and they paused so those people could be taken care of. And I think you're also succumbing a little bit to the kind of typical kind of media, if I dare I say it, sort of tendency to sort of, lampoon Trump. I would actually say that the Trump. Yeah, I'm afraid so, Andrew. Yeah, et tu, Andrew. It's quite shocking. Actually, I would say that one of the differences between the 2 campaigns is that Trump has actually been, and you may not like what you hear there, but Trump has been talking about the issues. Trump has been talking about immigration. He's been talking about inflation. He's been talking about the economy. He's been talking about the state of the world. He's been talking about his proposals, in particular, just, ever proliferating series of tax cuts that he's kind of promising everybody. But he's talking about the issues. And again, some of it's very controversial. Sometimes, frankly, he outright lies about some of the issues, but he's talking about the issues that people are concerned about. What's Kamala Harris talking about? Kamala Harris is talking about, again, her campaign is talking about, joy, and she's going on these sort of very, very soft shows talking about, drinking a beer with Stephen Colbert. And she's the one who's being incredibly kind of issue avoidant and very, very lightweight. And I think, by the way, I do think that's one of the reasons I think Trump is in better shape, because she's just not expressing any kind of particular take on the issue. Now, she's going to have a very tough interview this week, interestingly, with Fox News. It's a very interesting move that she's going to do that. So that may change a little bit. But I think, honestly, right now, the contrast between the 2 candidates is that Trump is hammering the issues because he knows that's where she is vulnerable, because people associate her with Joe Biden. And she is trying to avoid the issues and talk about, she's talking a lot about Trump, obviously, and talk about democracy and talking about joy and all these other things. So I think actually Trump is getting the better of the argument.
Molly, Harris has raised a lot more money than Trump, and is spending more money, as I understand it. Actually raised, I think, about $1 billion in one short period of time, on top of other stuff that she's raised. We're also being told that get out the vote in the swing states will be the crucial thing. Who can get their core voters out in the biggest numbers? Does that extra money give her an advantage in getting the vote out? Do the Democrats have a better get the vote out machine than the Republicans?
Well, that's the million-dollar question at this stage, but I do think that that's what matters right now. At this point, 3 weeks until the election, the time for persuasion is pretty much over. It really is about getting your voters to the polls, and it is about that ground game. And a lot of Republicans are very concerned that the Trump campaign has not built a traditional ground game. They've outsourced a lot of it to outside groups in terms of, the sort of door knocking and phone calling and these sorts of operations. They have not put as much resources into it, in part because Trump has demanded that most of those resources allocated by the campaign be spent instead on election integrity, pursuing, his sort of phantom suspicions about voter fraud and so forth. And the Democrats historically have put a lot more emphasis on this sort of grassroots organizing that they do, and it remains to be seen. It doesn't get you more than a point or two in the final tally, but that could be crucial in a campaign that is so close. So I do think that now that we are at the stage where in many states, including most or all of the swing states, ballots have gone out by mail. Early voting is open in many places. I was in Arizona last week where people are now going to the polls in person or getting their ballots in the mail, and about 3/4 of Arizonans will vote by mail. So voters are voting, and it's all about getting out the vote at this stage. I think it has less to do with big shifts in the race or big landmark tentpole events to change the narrative, because it's just too late in a lot of ways.
Jerry, what's this row about medical records? They always play a part in US presidential campaigns. What's happened here?
Yeah, it's another example of, again, where I think Trump is talking about the issues and Kamala is trying to talk about something else. So yeah, I mean, it's been, generally speaking, the case that candidates issue medical records on their medical history. Trump has not done that. Famously, when he was in the White House, he had his doctor issue a sort of statement saying he was as fit as kind of Atlas or whatever.
He was the fittest man in the world.
Exactly, that's exactly right. But he's never publishes medical records, and so Kamala Harris has issued some medical records saying that she's in perfectly good shape as sitting vice president. She does that, of course, anyway. Look, I think it's just, again, another attempt, honestly, by the Democrats to sort of, to get at Trump in ways that avoid talking about the issues. And again, I think the problem with them on that is that Trump is a 78-year-old man. He's obviously not in great physical shape. He's somewhat overweight, but nobody is thinking about that at all. Nobody, whenever they think about Donald Trump, they're not really thinking. He projects the image of a fairly robust, strong man, and that's not on voters' minds. So to sort of raise questions about whether or not he has high cholesterol, for example, which is what they were doing at the weekend, just doesn't. It just, again, smacks a little bit of desperation to me. So it's not going to move. It's not going to move any votes.